This is Monocle on Design, a show where we discuss everything from architecture and craft to furniture and fashion. I'm Nick Manise. On today's program, we speak to German architect Ole Scheeren and industrial facility talk about simplicity and utility. Plus, the last instalment of our summer series. All that coming up on Monocle on Design. Sam Hecht and Kim Collin founded London-based studio Industrial Facility in 2002. Kim trained as an architect and Sam as an industrial designer. Together, they create beauty out of utility with projects including a portable power box for furniture giant Herman Miller, a smart dining chair for Denmark's Tact, and a colour palette for paint brand Bleo. To find out more about this diverse range of work, I caught up with the duo in Milan earlier this year. We hear from Kim Collin first.
At the time that we formed, product design was very influenced by the new technology of computers, being able to draw and model objects in white floating space. So suddenly we had a lot of products designed without any context at all because the technology could allow you to. And we said, wait a second, we have history, we have not only design history but cultural histories. Those all seem to be erased by that white space. Our discussion was really about how much was missing, and we formed our office to try to have a point of view about that.
So, tell me a little bit about that role that tech played in shaping. It almost sounds like you went against it. Is that a fair assumption, Sam?
Yeah, it is. One of the very earliest clients that we had was Muji in Japan more than 20 years ago. What's interesting about Muji at that time, still to a degree now, is that they are a very, very accessible company. You can buy things at very reasonable prices. We essentially pitched to them at that time that the technology, and particularly industrial design, product design, the best way to describe it is it wasn't really addressing the context of how people were living. They were too much the context of the shop. In other words, the moment that you bought something was the guiding force behind companies, and once you'd bought it, in some ways that was really the measure of success. Whereas Muji's concept was very different. It was an idea at the time whereby the buying of it was irrelevant. It was how you were using it, and that's why there was never a brand on it, because a brand, once you bought it, is pretty much irrelevant when it's at home.
Yeah, like who wants to live in a house that has brand names or colors or forms or shapes shouting out at us, I come from this lineage and it's a company.
That's pretty intense.
Yeah.
It sounds pretty bad.
That's right, exactly. So we sold it to the CEO at that time, Masayaki Kanao. Let's try and do technology. And so we applied that thinking to things like telephones, radios.
Bath radio.
Bath radios, coffee makers, all of these sorts of industrial design products. And when you vacate, when you take out the things which are really not particularly useful, not really relevant, you're left with a much more of an essential idea. And it proved to be very successful. It captured people's imaginations. And that trajectory we then continued with other companies. I should say before industrial facilities started to become popular for furniture. But that was really where industrial facility was born. It was applying an architectural model, educational model, to industrial design.
Making a better product meant understanding how products can be made better. So it was a lot of arguing with factories that have one way of doing something and convincing them that if componentry could be rearranged or reconfigured, we could actually have a very different experience of the product. And we got a lot of, but we've never done that before. And we said, exactly, that's the chance we see. But that chance is really about finding a balance of the economy of making the thing, what the thing ends up being, and how we end up living with it, right? So industrial design, of course, it's three-dimensional in its objectness, but it's three-dimensional over time in our lives, from its genesis to its formation.
Can I ask a little bit about Future Facility? It sounds like a lot of this early work was about looking at the future, and now you've got a dedicated program. Is that the right term for or part of your business that is about examining this?
That's a good way to say it. We say a branch of industrial facility is Future Facility. Future Facility was originally formed to look at the way products are networked. So it was about the Internet of Things. It was the rise of that very popular and known term of the Internet of Things, products that can talk to each other, not just...
Which I'm going to be honest, creeps me out a little bit.
Well, it's happening every day, and you're benefiting from it. Sounds more sci-fi than it is. It's actually already quite a big reality. So we never consider ourselves to be blue sky thinkers about the future. We like to ponder about how far away, but we also like to materialize ideas for how we live now and the direction we're going in the future.
Essentially, we're seeing the same mistakes happen again. And they're happening again because we're confronted with so much choice, so much potential. A lot of that potential is very nice to wallow in, but you need to curate it, you need to edit it. And ultimately, that is what makes it useful. And when something is useful, it essentially has the ability to transcend into life, and you don't really need to think about it. That's really the goal. The reason we're seeing the same mistakes is that we're confronted with this choice from software. Hardware is in particular seen as simply just a carrier of software.
Endless choices, endless iterations.
Endless updates.
Less labor, more economy, quicker.
How do you marry that relationship between a product and the Internet of Things? Like this technology that's constantly evolving and constantly changing. I mean, I know planned obsolescence exists, but in an ideal world, a product should be able to last. What happens if the technology is changing so quickly?
We have one client, Vastberg in Sweden, who specializes in lighting. And they've recently revisited an older project of ours called Dalston lamp. It's a pendant lamp. And said, hey, LEDs have improved. We can make now a better module. We can get more power out of one LED, a cob LED, and we can make it work harder. How can we express this in a form that is true to Dalston, the program of Dalston? So the company went to revisit the technology. And some companies are trying to replace the technology or build a form that, when batteries change shape and capacity, we can trade them out, etc. And that still feels a little bit like a DIY project for everyone, but maybe that will become more normalized as more companies do that.
Another example was one which is actually launched, and it probably took 10 years of discussion and conversation. The reason is many of the companies that we're working with are not necessarily in the technology field, and so they rely on technology companies to solve some of the problems that they have independently. A perfect example is Herman Miller, I've been working with for many years. Now they're a furniture company, they're not a technology company, but they rely on technology providers to solve things like, for instance, power. What is the power looking like where you plug in to charge, or these sorts of things, and how they interface with furniture and environments. About 2 years ago, they essentially said to us, let's just do it ourselves. And that particular problem was in an office environment, particularly in things like work clubs, the notion of working anywhere, finding a space, a comfortable space to work, for people is always different. Some people like a bit of noise, a bit of activity. Other people like solitude, to focus. What's made it possible is Wi-Fi because it's completely wireless, but the component which is so difficult is power. The idea of mobile power, when it's left to technology companies, they only think about their product. They know it's very hard for them to put themselves in the position of the context of what is real usability. And so we developed a totally new battery system for Herman Miller. And the idea is that you only buy what you need. So you start with a very reasonable battery that is a solid state. It's recyclable, but you can send it back to Herman Miller.
It is a portable battery that one individual can carry around wherever they go, in any space.
And from this one battery, you can work the whole day. You'll be able to run your laptop, and it looks like a bit like a dumbbell, I guess, and that was partly because we wanted to really express power. We didn't want to make it fluff. We didn't want to make it look like a speaker or a handbag, but it has its own typology. It's nothing like you've ever seen before.
It has batteryness about it.
Yeah.
So you can rate that it is a
battery. Yeah. You would not mistake it.
And it's a shareable device. And so that also brings into questions, okay, what happens if someone takes the battery, they're working, and they don't really take it back to charge? We built in a system where it can be locatable by facilities managers, so they can see where the battery is at every moment, what charge it's got, if it's been left behind, and they can retrieve it. Now, we then thought of the battery in this example because they're not a technology company, we can think of it in a greater scale. It's called the power box. You can take the power box and you can add it to other power boxes to then make a bigger battery. Yeah, so it's working in series. So now you can take 4 power box batteries and you could power a huge display, like a TV display, to do a presentation for up to 6 hours.
It's amazing to hear you talk about, it looks kind of like a dumbbell, but it's very distinctly a battery. What is the future of industrial design? Previously, when you're designing radios, there were switches and knobs, and it was a very tactile experience, that satisfying click on, click off.
Yes.
Now I feel like we're relying on screens to do everything. We're relying on the internet to do everything, and it feels like we're losing some distinctiveness around products. What sort of discussions are you having around, I guess, the shapes of things? Like, it sounds like now the communication is maybe less about dials and knobs, but more about what a new object that we've not had before suggests.
I would say always in our work, there's something we're relying on that is familiar to us. There's something maybe from the past that we understand. So we know a little bit of what it is, but we also don't know a little bit of what it could be. Yeah, and that's the future part. When we are shaping something, it comes from the idea of what the thing is, how it will be used, and how it will live over time. And with our experience and this micro-macro push-pull about space and how people are living and how that's changing, I guess we look back on the form to make sure it holds that message, that we don't veer from it and say, oh, let's get a little bit of, some arbitrary shape in here, or a nice radius, or, oh, this would be lovely, right? The form, it really evolves over time, over all the challenges we face in the product, in the making and the distribution of the project, the whole life cycle of the product. It's a long answer for $100,000.
That was which is probably what it deserves. I mean, it does need a long answer, but maybe another component I was also trying to get at is, where does intuition come in these days? Again, that comes back to those switches and dials. You kind of know what you're meant to do. Do you know what you're meant to do with the battery? Is it intuitive? How do you build that in?
It's full of codes. We actually rely on those codes. Those codes are very important. With a battery, there are actually already codes. There's a wonderful system called AA, AAA. There is a code that is developed, that exists. And what we're doing is we're using that information to imbue it into a new product where when you walk past it, you would sense that's going to do something to do with power. You're not quite sure, but there's a sense that this is something that, there's a battery there. It's a very analytical type of process of design that essentially allows a new code to exist quite successfully.
Now, there are lessons that you've learned over the journey that you're going to continue to apply in the coming years. Like, what are some of the big themes that have become pillars of your work that you're going to use to continue to drive future facility and industrial facility?
I would say simplification is probably one of our big banners, and that's not a stylistic thing. Someone asked me recently, why wouldn't we make things more complicated? And I said, why would we? There's so much noise in our heads and in the world. There's so much noise in actually getting something made, the idea of that. There's so much complication. I hope that we're heading towards simplifying things when we propose a project. I think that's a quite big ideal for us. And the simplification isn't necessarily just formal. As I said, it has to do with the process. Like, could we make it easier to make? Could we make it easier to distribute? Could we make it easier to live with? Not demanding so much attention psychologically from us, because other more important things do.
What we would always do is continue just removing the silliness of the world that exists, making things which are useful, agreeable, beautiful, reliable. There's something about them that is also in some ways inspirational. We want everything that we do for people to love so much that it's quite hard to part with them. They're like a good friend. You want them to stick around and not throw them away.
That's the best sustainability message, right?
Yeah, it really is.
For us, it always was. It's not new. It's not a new...
So make things that people love.
Make things that last, that people will love enough to keep.
That was Industrial Facilities' Kim Collin, and before that, Sam Hecht. It's summertime. It's
It's the Summer Series. Monocle Design's Summer Essentials.
I'm in the studio with Monocle's senior correspondent. He's been soundtracking our summer with playlists on Monocle Radio, and that easy breezy jingle that you just heard, listeners, is the sunniest man I think I've ever met. Fernando Augusto Pacheco, welcome to Monocle on Design.
It's summertime.
It is summertime, and you've got that summer energy today. We've got a beautiful linen shirt on, despite the fact that it's raining in London, but we can ignore that. Sometimes all you need to do is dress for summer and you feel like you're in summer.
Agreed.
Tell us what you've picked. What are your selections? What's your additions?
I like to break rules. I'm sorry for that. So I
Fernando.
chose... No, I'm really sorry, but I chose a vibe. So for example, if you come to my house, there will be 3 design-led things that I love and I think are very important for me in the summer.
Run us through them.
The first one is ashtrays. Controversial for some. First of all, I don't smoke. I collect ashtrays.
I love this.
I am fascinated by them and they're very beautiful.
So what about ashtrays attracts you? What pulls you into them?
I think they're sexy. It's purely visually led.
It's like a chic 1960s party sort of vibe.
Exactly.
That's what I'm picturing.
I think my grandma influenced me as well because she still smokes and she does it in a very glamorous way. Perhaps that's just my vision of it. But so I do collect them. I have some vintage ones from the 70s. They're very colorful. They're quite large and heavy as well. But for example, I was in Munich, like to a vintage store, and they had like some tiny ones. One was orange and the other one was kind of a cobalt blue. My boyfriend, perhaps he doesn't say, Fernando, stop, you don't even smoke. We have almost 10 ashtrays at home.
It sounds like, you're finding them in vintage markets in Munich. You're, picking objects that perhaps remind you of your grandmother. So there's a kind of beauty to that, and I appreciate that. But why summer? Why for summer?
It's summer because you open the window and then,
and you can have a
you get your
lolly
favorite
outside.
Ashtray, and I think that's the image of summer for me. And I'm talking here from my, small flat in Soho. We're not in the Mediterranean. We're not in Brazil. That's the summer I have here, day to day.
Okay.
Life in London.
Build the vibe. So we've got the ashtrays out. Where are we going next?
This is something new. I always wanted to have, not very expensive cups, but very summery ones. Something not quite disposable. So I found a perfect one at Le Bon Marché, and I was looking at the name of this company. It's called Memento Synth. I love musical synthesizers and I'm very influenced by names. I saw synth, I was like, that's the name of the cup, that's the name of the brand. So I bought it, and they had in my favorite color as well, mandarin colored. They are made of plastic. They are not perhaps the most chic ones, but I bought like a nice set. So you have your vintage ashtray from the 70s with your nice mandarin colored cup from this brand Memento Synth.
And you talked about colour. Obviously, colour is so attached to the season. Orange brings that sort of energy. Would orange be your summer colour of choice?
Yes, my mandarin cup, of course. I do have an orange ashtray from Mexico.
Perfect. Okay, so we're getting a little bit of a colour. We can have a little bit of a mood board here. I quite like this. You talked about them being plastic. Materiality is so linked to how we feel about an object and no doubt how we feel about a season. But there is something about the easy breezy lightness of plastic that really marries up nicely with the easy breeziness of summer. We've got the ashtrays, we've got these amazing cups. What are we finishing with here?
And we've got music on my beautiful sound system from Ruark, which is a British family-based company. They make incredible sound systems. And Nick, I still buy CDs. So when I listen to music at home, sometimes Spotify, but I still put a CD on because then there will be a vibe to it. So my beautiful Ruark, there is a CD player there and it's also made of wood. And mine is a walnut colored, so not quite orange, but earthy tones.
We're in those tones. It sounds like it almost inspires a habit, it inspires a behaviour. It wants you to have that ritual of putting on a CD, and I think that shows the beauty of investing in an amazing sound system like this. Fernando Augusto Pacheco, thank you so much for joining us, and thank you for being the voice of our summer series.
It's the Summer Series. Monocle Design's Summer Essentials. Design Essentials.
The architect and urbanist Ole Scheeren was a long-serving partner and director at OMA, or the Office of Metropolitan Architecture. There, he worked on projects including the CCTV headquarters in Beijing, a futuristic, twisting skyscraper. It's experience he brought to his own studio, Bureau Ole Scheeren, which he founded in 2010. With offices in Berlin, Bangkok, Beijing, New York, Hong Kong, and London, his team works on architecture, urbanism, interiors, and research projects across the globe. Ole joined me in the studio to discuss why he set up base in Asia, how the role of the office has shifted, and his current major project, the Tencent Helix, a set of twisting office towers in Shenzhen, China. Ole began by sharing why he started looking towards Asia.
There was this very intense early experience of those days. And it was another 10 years, actually, while I was a partner at OMA. We were invited to a competition to design and envision the national broadcaster of China. And that, again, coincided with that moment of the Olympics. And I thought it would be incredibly interesting to be able to speculate then as an architect on how a piece of architecture, a building, could partly encapsulate this new era of China.
You go over there, you're working with OMA, you ultimately break out on your own. Everyone seems to be in Shanghai, but you're in Beijing. Why set up the office there?
Beijing was always the center of culture and the art scene, not only politics. So it was quite a place that had a lot of depth and a lot of tension at the same time, a very fertile ground for an exploration about China's future.
And how has that set you up for practice now? If that's your foundation, if that's where the studio is, what does that background, I guess, give you as a point of difference?
This was an important anchor stone for the studio, but the studio was always set up as an international practice. We had, from the early days, a setup in London, a setup in Europe. We're practicing across the borders, but simply China was such a dynamic place, so full of opportunity, and really posing a very explicit question about rewriting the script of their own future, which was, of course, a very interesting context for an architect to get involved in.
The rewriting of that script, you're almost completely reshaping the face of modern China. How do you walk that line, I guess, between rapid development but also still delivering quality structures? I mean, that sounds like it's quite a challenge.
I saw it as our role from the beginning to really focus on not just being part of the quick moves, but in a way to come there and say, like, even though things have to happen quickly, we want to think, and we want to think seriously, and we want to take things seriously, and we want to develop some, as we called it, prototypes for the future of the country, and explore possibilities and really rewrite some of the rule books that were existing. And we literally did that, for example, in processes of how buildings, very complex buildings, would get approvals. We pioneered a whole approval system through CCTV because it was such a complex structure that there were no existing systems that could actually accommodate that.
You know, you're talking about prototypes there, and you're talking about CCTV. You've just won a commission for Tencent, the tech company. You're building, I guess, a 4 helix-shaped headquarters is my best attempt at explaining it. You look at the renderings, it, again, looks like an incredibly complex structure to build. This feels like something that's distinctly Chinese. You know, when I think of Chinese architecture today, I think of people that are willing to take risks. I think of buildings that are willing to push the envelope. But how did, I guess, CCTV lay the foundation to do something like Tencent 20 years later?
CCTV was the second largest building ever built in the world at the time. The most complex engineering. It, in a way, broke a lot of records and really taught me a lot of things. One of them was clearly scale. The other was complexity. Another one was probably also speed. But the most important, I think, was really the attempt to question a particular status quo, to rethink the way in which a building would work, the way in which people would work inside a building, what that would really mean for architecture as a whole. And I think now, 20 years later, we're working on a project that is actually the same size almost. It's 500,000 square meters, 5 million square feet roughly. Headquarters that, for comparison, is twice the size of Apple campus in California. So scale is really a very particular aspect of the work in China. But this is really a continuous exploration and evolution of an investigation in how the place of work is changing and how our expectation vis-a-vis the spaces we inhabit is changing. That's really the fundamental quality of that. Particularly today, the world has come through COVID. The world has come through a particular confrontation with space, right? People were locked up in spaces and suddenly realized like how important it is, the envelopes we live in, the buildings we live in, and maybe how inadequate many of the situations are that we find ourselves. As long as we could freely walk in and out, it wasn't maybe as obvious. But I think for us as architects, this was always the obvious question. What is the quality of the spaces we want to create? What is the quality of life we want to attain, and what are the expectations we need to channel through design as the tool of our work.
How does this come across in something like Tencent, which you're working on right now? How do you make sure there's those qualities, I guess, that make people feel welcome, that make it possible to stay in these places for a long period of time?
I think the office has, of course, fundamentally transformed, not only through COVID, already before, through the whole arrival of digital work, the fact that you could do almost anything anywhere. The role of the office has dramatically shifted from a utilitarian place of executing work to actually much more of a social environment in which you can generate things that maybe on your own wouldn't happen. The fundamental qualities of the workplace have become far more social than utilitarian. And at the same time, if we want to look at a project like Tencent Helix, I think there's a moving away from the gimmicky early ideas of like jazzing up the workplace. Yeah, the early days of American tech headquarters, it was all a very gimmicky take. The office as a children's playground, and then I think we've reached a point of maturity where it's clear that we're not all only children. There's also a serious aspect to work and to life, and in that sense, it's a much less gimmicky and much less only playful take. It's a take that really looks very seriously at issues of productivity, of focus, but also, again, of social connectivity and togetherness. And the building tries to structure that in very clear and effective ways.
How does it do that? Is it through the layout of rooms? I'm assuming there's no foosball tables and beanbags in Tencent.
There's no London buses that are declared meeting rooms inside now. Tencent Helix is, in a way, it's a combination of something very simple that then becomes very complex and then becomes quite simple again. It's a set of 4 towers that are split in 8 different pieces that in themselves are very functional and efficient. And then they twist in a central vortex. It's almost like a fusion chamber that then brings all the elements of the HQ together in that social mixing chamber and in a place where really interaction and a lot of other domains of recreational qualities join in. But it's not that the entire thing has become that playground, but it's really an interplay of proximity between, in a way, zones of focus and function and zones of interaction.
I think there's this whole thing with open plan office culture, and it's like, well, actually you do need to strike a balance. You need moments for privacy, but you also need moments for collaboration. You need moments for chance, but you also need moments for solitude. And it sounds like that's what this building's going to be doing.
You also need a sense of both individuality and connectivity in terms of the workplace itself, but of course also in terms of the building and its urban context. I think it's very important how a piece of building is situated within its environment, how it not only isolates itself within the self-obsession of what it is, but in a way really interacts with a wider context. For example, Tencent Helix sits on a huge plateau that we call the Urban Forum, and it's almost like a city of restaurants and shops and all kinds of things where the building itself really blends out and merges with the city and creates a highly active and interactive public space.
My thanks to Ole Scheeren there. And that's all for today's show. For more design stories, listen to our 5-minute midweek bonus show, Monocle on Design Extra, which airs on Thursdays. And if you enjoy print, then do pick up a copy of Monocle magazine as well. It's on all good newsstands now. Today's episode was produced and edited by May Lee Evans. I'm Nick Manise, and you can reach me on nm@monocle.com. Thanks for listening.